So, Asha, what's Alvin Bragg's legal theory for charging Trump in the hush money case?
Uh, it's complicated. I'm Asha Rengappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent and a legal and national security analyst.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet. Okay. Where do we start? So I think today we're basically just in speculative mode now. We're anticipating a grand jury indictment from the Manhattan DA's office. We're pretty sure that it relates to the hush money payments made to Stormy Daniels by Michael Cohen back in 2016. And we know that because she's testified in front of the grand jury and he's testified in front of the grand jury. But I think that there is some question on what the legal theory is going to be. In other words, how would Bragg design these charges in a way to both be something that he can prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury and will hold up against legal challenges, and also reflect something that is a crime that people would be charged with, as opposed to some kind of Frankenstein type of they've called this the zombie prosecution, like a Frankenstein prosecution of something that no one's ever seen before. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think you want to. What you want as a prosecutor is always to charge a case that is in line with your prosecutions in other cases. And if you're deviating from that, if you're prosecuting something totally new or different, usually that comes with additional challenges, and that's something you want to signal. I had prosecuted a first of its kind case, and it was like a big deal, even though it was of somebody who was unknown, because that was unusual and hadn't been done, and all of that.
So let's start with the very basic part that we are pretty certain he's going to start with, the baseline charge. And the baseline charge here seems to be a falsification of business records, because when Michael Cohen paid Stormy Daniels $130,000, he paid Stormy Daniels out of his own pocket, and then he was reimbursed for that payment by the Trump Organization. The Trump Organization listed this reimbursement as payments for legal services, when in fact Michael Cohen did not provide legal services. And so actually documenting that in a way that did not reflect what the payment truly was for is itself a fraudulent entry.
That's right, if it's done with the intent to defraud. And I think we talked about that last week, right? I mean, that there's challenges proving intent to defraud here. We'll have to see what their evidence is on that.
So now the criticism of that is that the falsification of business records charge is only a misdemeanor being a crime that is punishable by less than 1 year, generally considered to be less important or significant offenses. Though I know we've in our little lawyer chat group, we've had talks about how there are serious crimes like domestic violence crimes that are misdemeanors, and sometimes maybe the question should be, why is this not actually a more serious crime under the law, right? In other words,
Sure.
the misdemeanor piece, I don't think always answers the question of how much we value this in terms of the harm it creates. But in any case, the falsification is itself a misdemeanor, which would be an odd thing to charge first, in this historical indictment against a former president. But New York law, so if we're kind of creating the flow chart here, New York law has a provision that if the falsification of business records is done with the intent to commit, aid in the commission, or conceal another crime, then it can become a felony offense.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think the question here is, what is the felony? And that's there you go. It's
What
like,
is
where's
the
Waldo?
felony?
What's the felony? That's the question for today.
Yes. And so until now, I think the discussion has largely centered around an assumption that the underlying felony is a campaign finance violation.
Right. And I will just point out the New York Times had some reporting on that. Now, that may have been speculation from Trump's attorneys. We don't know. But that's why we went down that path last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair.
And, then you get into, again, going down the flow chart. If you go down underlying felony as campaign finance, this is how my mind thinks. Then you have either possible state campaign finance laws that could have been violated or federal campaign finance laws that have been violated. And you run into problems in either of those tracks. On the state track, there is a potential legal roadblock, which is that because Trump was running for federal office, that state law may be what's called preempted by federal law. In other words, it's not something that can be enforced.
Correct.
If you go down the federal campaign finance law, the roadblock you hit is it's not clear that the New York statute that allows, I call it the bump up, that allows the bump up includes federal crimes as an underlying offense.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you're
that would be like a first of its. That would be something that would have to get decided by the New York
right.
courts,
So that
right?
would require statutory. I think both of those would require statutory interpretation. The first one of the Federal Election Campaign Act, and the second one of New York state law. And, I think they're both potentially novel questions that could take a while to figure out.
Right. That's sort of like when I said, hey, when you're doing something for the first time, even if you're charging John Doe instead of Donald John Trump, that's a big deal, right? Either of those would be like a path breaking case under New York law potentially.
Yes. So, I think the criticism has been, okay, so you have this pathway to bump this up to a felony, but if you're going to go down this campaign finance route, this is a very risky proposition. It's not something that has really been done before, though I think some of our colleagues disagree and say that there's other precedent. I'm not really sure. I haven't delved into that. But I think, oh my God, Pancake.
Pancake is her cat. Just if you're listening and not watching, Pancake, unlike Henry, my dog, is
naughty.
Is naughty. Yes, indeed.
Very naughty.
Yes.
So, so I think that, and I think that there are people waiting to jump at, the whole campaign finance thing and to tear it apart and to be fair to those critics, because of the reasons that we just outlined, it's not entirely clear that Bragg would be able to move forward even as a legal matter on that theory.
Yeah, I think that there's a possibility that both of those questions could get resolved against them in New York courts. And by the way, another feature of having charging things that are so complicated in that are a novel is that it delays a prosecution. In other words, you have to have this whole court fight beforehand. And it wouldn't surprise me if courts are like, we're going to let this be appealed before you even get to a trial, because if it turns out that the highest court in New York, which is called the Court of Appeals, disagrees and says, no, this is not a proper legal theory, there wouldn't be a trial at all. So I could see a court allowing defendants to do that.
Right. So yesterday, I was speculating on Twitter, as I am wont to do. I was thinking, well, he listed these as payments for legal expenses to Michael Cohen in their books. What presumably, I mean, one cannot assume, but let's say there's evidence that then Trump organization took this as a deduction on their state taxes because it would be an expense to the company. Obviously, it would be a fraudulent deduction because those services were never received. Then could the underlying crime be criminal tax fraud, which under New York law is basically anything that is done with an intent to evade tax liability, or alter your tax liability or reduce your tax liability. And then this morning, the New York Times published an op-ed by our colleagues Ryan Goodman and Andrew Weissman, which had a slightly different perspective on the tax fraud theory, which is that what the Trump organization did in reimbursing Cohen was they didn't just say, hey, we're going to give you $130,000 in, 4 installments, equal installments that add up to $130,000, because Michael Cohen says, wait, I have to report you when you pay me for legal services, I have to report that as income, and then I pay taxes on that. And so, I'm not actually getting the full $130,000 back because, after they take the taxes out of it, it's less than that. And so the Trump organization paid him more, which he then reported in order to, be whole to the tune of at or close to $130,000. And we know from previous reporting from when Cohen was charged with his campaign finance or pled guilty to it, that he had sham invoices from the Trump organization. So they, presumably these amounts and dates and everything are listed out. What do you think of the tax fraud theory, either as a fraudulent deduction taken on the Trump org side, fraudulent income reported to Cohen by the Trump org side, fraudulent income reported by Cohen on his own tax returns? I mean, to me, this sounds much more straightforward.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts. I mean, first of all, just on its face, there's some really appealing things about it. I mean, first of all, it sidesteps these sort of novel, unusual legal theories, right? First of its kind. This is much more bread and butter, right? Tax crimes are the sort of things that get charged all the time, and people having false business records in relation to tax crimes is pretty commonly prosecuted, including in New York, based on some work that others have dug up. So that I think is really promising. And I will say, regarding the first of the two, the Asha speculation theory of the underlying crime being tax evasion or some sort of tax crime by the Trump organization, if the facts bear out, I think that's very strong. And the reason that that's strong, I think a couple reasons. One is it rings true, I think, to a jury. In other words, I think a lot of jurors would have trouble getting their head around the idea that paying off Stormy Daniels as a campaign expense, like that's going to be a head scratcher to certain jurors. But I think jurors are going to kind of come into this thinking that big corporations try to lower their taxes by any means necessary. And so trying to convince them that some billionaire in his company are trying to lower their taxes in a not entirely honest way is going to appeal to jurors. All right. So that's the first thing. And then second of all, there's no question that the state of New York has an interest in making sure that people aren't evading their taxes, and so it's completely like righteous and normal and accepted and commonplace for the state to bring charges related to tax crime. So I think that would be great. One thing I'll flag though is the tax bill here was not due until after Trump was president, and so it wouldn't surprise me if, because he became president and they thought there would be increased scrutiny, that they ultimately didn't go forward and claim this as a business expense. And if they didn't, then that would put the DA in an odd position of saying, well, we believe that this was constructed in order to facilitate a tax crime that never actually occurred. It would be like an attempt or something like that. And that I think is more we're back in the realm of things that I think I would not ordinarily be charged. I struggle with whether or not that's the sort of case that would be charged. If there's no actual tax loss to the state of Illinois, it keeps saying Illinois because I'm from Illinois, but it's in the state of New York. So I'm skeptical of that. But even then, I think it may be stronger than the campaign finance.
So then the underlying crime you're saying would have to be a conspiracy to commit tax fraud.
Or an attempt. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, or an attempt. But here's the thing. Wasn't the prosecution against the Trump organization, the criminal prosecution that just happened, he was continuing his tax shenanigans even after he became president, no?
I don't know.
I don't recall. I mean, I would have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure that it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm president. Got to do everything by the books now. I mean, come on. Like, this is Trump we're talking about. Well,
that would be, but that's great.
That guy tried to deduct a $5, dues payment to the Boy Scouts as a business deduction.
No kidding. Okay, well, yeah. I'll take your word of it. That's amazing.
That was actually from the New York, with the civil investigation into his foundation that ended up being dissolved.
Okay, wow.
He paid for Barron's Boy Scout dues, which was literally, I think, $5 from the foundation, which was, an inappropriate expense to be paying out of a charitable foundation. And then I guess, so I think that was the fraud, is that, he was paying for stuff out of
foundation,
that, which was already getting tax breaks.
All right, that makes more sense. I just think in general, if this was done, if they actually went and defrauded the state, then I wonder why. Like, yes, that would be, I think, an obvious way to charge. So I would say, from my perspective, the sort of Asha theory. Okay, we can call you can come up with your names. I'll come up with my names.
Do I get to get credit? I didn't. Mine wasn't in the New York Times.
I don't know if it matters. It may be better than the theory that was in the New York Times. I like that theory if that pans out factually. The other theory is that this is all done to help out Michael Cohen. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that rings true. Like, why would the Trump organization go through all this trouble to like help out Cohen, right? I guess the point is
to keep his mouth shut, to keep him happy. They did that to Weisselberg too. Remember, they were paying him. They had a separate set of books. They were giving him an apartment. They were giving, they were giving him all kinds of stuff under the table for him to be able to do their dirty work.
Yeah, but then why not just pay it to him? Like, why not just characterize it accurately as a hush money payment and not have it be an income to him at all?
Because they didn't want it to be known. I mean, because it was also a campaign finance
or
violation.
Because they just didn't want. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's got to be some way of explaining that, right, separately. So maybe they'll charge both. Maybe they'll do it both ways. I don't know. I'm that one I'm a little bit more skeptical of, but it's interesting. I mean, that's just there's a bit of a gotcha element to me with that one. Like, the underlying crime is like Michael Cohen's crime. It also, I will just say, also puts way more weight suddenly on Cohen's testimony again. I mean, if this.
That's why I don't know that you could actually, that's such a good point, that would be Michael Cohen's crime of misreporting his income, which, by the way, would technically be a net gain for New York, because if he was over-reporting income, if he was inflating income that he actually didn't provide services for, is fraud, but also presumably New York got its tax money.
I know a lot of you are listening, you're like, I don't really care. Let's just get this done. But I'll just tell you that when I look at this as somebody who had been a prosecutor for a long time, like, ordinarily when we're trying to weigh whether to bring a case, like, a big thing for us is, did the government lose money here? Like, did the people actually get harmed? Like, that's because ultimately there's like unlimited crimes that could be charged. Like, if you're a prosecutor, there's people like trying to come to you all the time, like, charge this, charge that. And you're trying to make decisions about what the best use of the public's resources are. And so if like there's no actual loss, like that's why I said like an attempt, I would find that like a head scratcher, like they didn't actually go through with it. Or here, like if he actually gained, like the public gained money off of this, like I mean, it definitely raises more questions about why Bragg thinks that this is worth all of the resources, because this is going to cost a lot of money in terms of time and resources for the Manhattan DA's office.
So the things to look out for: number one, is there a bump up from a misdemeanor to a felony? Two, what is the underlying crime that is doing the bump up? Is it a campaign finance violation? Is it criminal tax fraud? Is it conspiracy to commit criminal tax fraud? Or is it something else that we have not even imagined yet?
Yes, and I'm very interested to see, because I think there's been a lot of speculation. I think it is entirely possible that what the New York Times reported was the Trump lawyers' speculation about what the charges would be, rather than like an insider account from the Manhattan DA's office. So it may be very different, and in which case we're going to have to figure that out and talk about those charges whenever they come out on this podcast, which we'll do. But at least this gives you a sense of what's on our minds right now, and I think it's fair to say our reasoning on it's evolving. And I actually really like the idea you came up with, Asha. So maybe you should go work for the Manhattan DA's office.
Thank you.